I'll be generous and give some charity to a poor bottom feeder like you. Go on, pick it up." The hollow sound of coins clinking echoed through the air. I exhaled quietly as I stared at the scattered coins on the floor. "Hey, what's wrong? Pick them up. For someone like you, even this little money must be a fortune, right? Come on, pick it up. It's your precious money, isn't it?" I was at my middle school reunion. The one looking down on me was Brandon, the son of a company president. He had always mocked me for growing up in a single-mother household. My former classmates stood around, their expressions awkward and uneasy. But no one said a word. "Hey, everyone. Guess what poor Ryan's job is now? A convenience store clerk? Or maybe a factory worker?" Brandon straightened his suit sleeves, deliberately flaunting them as he continued. "Oh, or maybe he's taking care of his mom. She worked herself to the bone at that factory, didn't she? I hope she hasn't broken down yet." He put on a fake look of concern, but his eyes were full of amusement. "Well, I guess it suits you, doesn't it? Taking care of someone. That's about all you're good for. You were always giving off that poor single-mother household feel sorry for me vibe back in school. Growing up in a single-parent home was never something I was ashamed of. In fact, I was proud of the days I worked hard to make my mother smile. But the man laughing in front of me, even after 10 years, still couldn't understand that. I clenched my fists and glared at him. Just then, the doors to the hall quietly opened. "Sorry to keep you waiting." A composed, elegant voice rang out. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. A woman in a black dress gracefully entered and placed her hand on my arm. Brandon's face went pale. What are you doing here?" "Because I'm his wife." And just like that, Brandon would soon deeply regret his actions. His behavior would soon turn into a massive scandal involving his entire company. My name is Ryan. I'm 28 years old. Tonight, I'm attending my middle school reunion. A high-end hotel ballroom. The soft glow of the chandeliers gives the room a refined atmosphere. Tables are lined with hors d'oeuvres and champagne glasses shimmer faintly in the light. Old friends gather in small groups, catching up with one another. 15 years ago, we sat together in the same classroom. Now, everyone has grown up in their own way, yet traces of the past still remain. It's been so long. How have you been? What do you do for work now? Amidst the friendly chatter, the air suddenly turned ice cold. Well, if it isn't poor Ryan, long time no see. The man mocking me now was none other than Brandon, my former classmate. His father's company, Simmons Technology, was a well-known industrial robotics systems integrator. Back in middle school, he never missed a chance to ridicule me for my family situation. A scratched-up desk placed in the corner of the classroom. That was my seat. "Hey, wearing the same clothes again. How lame." "Well, what do you expect? He's from a single-mother household. He probably can't afford new clothes." Brandon's voice always echoed through the classroom. As the son of a company president, he carried designer bags, wore brand-new shoes, and looked down on me with disdain. The other students just averted their eyes in silence. Yes, I grew up in a single-parent home. We weren't wealthy, but my days of working hard for my mother's happiness were fulfilling in their own way. So I never saw it as something to be ashamed of. But Brandon never saw it that way. Even after all these years. "Long time no see. You still dress so plain. What do you do now?" His tone carried the same condescending edge it always had. "Actually, never mind. I'm sure it's nothing impressive anyway." He let out a loud laugh and turned to the others, raising his voice for attention. "Hey, everyone. Guess what poor Ryan's job is now? A convenience store clerk? Or maybe a factory worker?" Brandon adjusted his suit sleeves again, flaunting them as he continued. "Oh, or maybe he's taking care of his mom. She worked herself to the bone at that factory, didn't she? I hope she hasn't broken down yet. He put on a fake look of concern, but his eyes were gleaming with amusement. Well, I guess it suits you, doesn't it? Taking care of someone. That's about all you're good for. You were always giving off that poor single mother household feel sorry for me vibe. Brandon smirked, slipping his hand into his pocket. Then he pulled out a handful of coins. Here, let me be generous to a bottom feeder. Go on, pick it up. The hollow sound of coins clinking echoed through the air. As I stared at the scattered coins on the floor, I let out a quiet breath. Hey, what's wrong? Pick them up. For someone like you, even this little money must be a fortune, right? Brandon straightened the collar of his brand new designer suit, his smug expression growing even more self-satisfied. By the way, things are going great for me. I was just promoted to head of our company's new business division. I'm already an executive VP. Yes, I'll be a president next. Our former classmates looked visibly uncomfortable. But no one said a word. People keep talking about the semiconductor downturn, but that doesn't affect a top-tier company like ours. We're set to surpass $200 million in revenue this year, and next year we expect to double that. Brandon spread his arms wide like he was delivering a speech on stage. Well, not that you'd ever be able to imagine that kind of world. Then his eyes suddenly landed on my left hand. Huh? What's with that ring? Don't tell me you're married? You? Huh? Oh yeah, last spring. The room went completely silent for a moment as Brandon let out a sneering laugh. Wow, so what's she like? Let me guess, ugly. Brandon. I tried to stop him in a low voice, but he only raised his voice further. Actually, I don't even need to ask. A woman desperate enough to marry someone like you must be just as pathetic. At that moment, the doors to the hall quietly opened. Sorry to keep you waiting. A poised, elegant voice rang through the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A tall woman in a sleek black dress gracefully stepped inside. Her silky black hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore simple yet refined jewelry. Ryan, sorry I'm late. The board meeting ran longer than expected. The woman, Charlotte, gently placed her hand on my arm. She had coincidentally had a high-level executive meeting nearby and had promised to stop by after it ended. Wait, Ryan, no way. Brandon's eyes widened in disbelief. Oh my, Brandon, it's been a while. At the sound of her voice, Brandon flinched as if he had been struck. No, it can't be, Ms. Adams? Yes, we just saw each other at last month's conference, didn't we? Brandon stared at Charlotte as if unable to process reality. Because Charlotte was the CEO of Adams Electronics, one of Brandon's company's biggest business partners. Your wife is Ms. Adams? Brandon gawked at us, his mouth hanging open as if his brain had completely shut down. The official announcement hasn't been made yet, has it? Charlotte smiled calmly but shot him a sharp look. Brandon's face turned pale in an instant. My husband, Ryan, is an invaluable executive assistant at my company. Just last month, he played a crucial role in closing a major deal in Singapore. Honestly, I'm lucky to be married to such an incredible man. No way, this can't be real. Brandon muttered to himself, completely stunned. The arrogant attitude from before was nowhere to be found. It's quite disappointing to learn that someone leading such an important business at your company behaves like this. I must say, this is rather troubling. Wait, please, there's an explanation for all of this. Brandon's voice cracked. H's face as pale as wax. No need for explanations. I saw and heard everything myself. Trust is the foundation of business, and unfortunately, I can no longer trust your company. You've got to be kidding. That would ruin us. Nearly 40% of our revenue comes from our deals with Adams Electronics. Our factory operations, our employees' salaries, everything depends on. Brandon nearly collapsed on the spot. The arrogance he had flaunted just moments ago had completely evaporated, replaced with sheer panic. "Oh, but you're an executive VP, aren't you?" Charlotte's voice took on a mockingly sweet tone. "And didn't you just say your company is set to double its revenue next year? Surely, a company that's successful won't be affected by losing just one business partner?" The room fell into a dead silence. The scattered coins on the floor, once a symbol of Brandon's mockery, now shone emptily, reflecting his own downfall. All around us, our former classmates held their breath, watching the dramatic turn of events unfold. Just moments ago, Brandon had been boasting, looking down on me with such confidence. And now, he stood there trembling in fear. It was like a scene straight out of a drama, leaving everyone speechless. That night, even after I returned home, the events of the reunion still lingered in my mind. Charlotte sat beside me, quietly holding my hand. She didn't say a word, but the warmth of her touch said everything. "Sorry." "For what?" "For ruining your company's deal with Brandon." Charlotte shook her head. With that kind of attitude, he was bound to cause problems sooner or later. If anything, I'm glad we caught it early. I'd been hearing some concerning rumors about his company, but I didn't have solid proof. This incident just confirmed that our concerns were justified. Saying this, she gently squeezed my hand. That warmth said everything. As I sat on the sofa, I found myself recalling events from 5 years ago. "Good morning." While carefully wiping down the hood of a luxury car gleaming in the morning sun, I greeted Mr. Adams. At the time, I was working as a driver for Adams Electronics. "Ah, good morning, Ryan. You're early as always." "Yes, sir. Considering the traffic, I started preparing the car 30 minutes ahead of schedule." Mr. Adams nodded with a smile. That day, he had several important meetings across the city, so I figured it was best to be prepared with extra time. "You're always so attentive." There was a hint of admiration in his voice. I felt a bit embarrassed by the compliment. To me, it wasn't anything special. Looking out for each other in everyday life. That was something I had naturally learned while growing up with my mother. A few days later, it happened on the day Mr. Adams suddenly fell ill. "Sir, are you all right?" Noticing something was off about his complexion, I instinctively felt a sense of unease. Through the rearview mirror, I could see him pressing a hand to his forehead, looking pained. "Ah, I just feel a little dizzy. We should head to a hospital immediately." Without hesitation, I changed the route and drove straight to a nearby university hospital. It was the same hospital where my mother had been treated before, one with highly skilled doctors. Fortunately, it wasn't anything serious, but my decision that day ended up earning Mr. Adams' trust. A few days later, I was called into his office. "Why did you take me to the hospital without hesitation?" he asked in a calm tone. "It reminded me of my mother," I answered honestly. Lowering my gaze, memories of that day resurfaced. When I was a kid, my mom always insisted she was fine, even when she looked unwell. Until one day she collapsed and we had to call an ambulance. Ever since then, whenever I see someone looking sick, I just can't ignore it. I apologize for acting on my own judgment. Mr. Adams remained silent, listening to my words. "That's right. You were raised by a single mother, weren't you?" "Yes, sir. But my mom never stopped smiling. So I never wanted to worry her." Before I could finish my sentence, he spoke again. "Ryan, would you become my executive assistant?" His sudden offer left me stunned. "Excuse me? I've actually been considering it for a while. But I don't have any qualifications or experience. You have a rare ability. You understand people's emotions." He smiled gently. "I've been watching you closely. Even something as simple as adjusting my schedule, you always consider the other person's situation. Skills can be taught, but the ability to empathize with others, That's not something we can easily learn. There was unwavering conviction in his voice. Besides, you have ambition. I've noticed you reading industry journals late into the night, haven't I? I looked up in surprise. I hadn't told anyone about that. Mr. Adams smiled kindly. I heard from the security staff. They told me you've been studying late into the night in the car. I'm sorry for using the company car after hours. There's nothing to apologize for. Mr. Adams shook his head. That kind of dedication is what matters. It seems your mother taught you a great way to live. His words made my chest tighten with emotion. So, what do you think? Would you like to work as my executive assistant and put your talents to use in a bigger world? I took a deep breath and bowed my head slowly. I would be honored to learn under your guidance. And just like that, I became Mr. Adams' assistant. About 6 months later, I overheard a tense conversation coming from one of the conference rooms during a business meeting. How many times do I have to say this? Do you really think such a mediocre proposal is enough to secure a deal with us? The voice belonged to Charlotte, Mr. Bennett's daughter. She was being groomed to take over the company one day and was currently making a name for herself as the head of the sales division. When I opened the door, I saw a salesman from a small business gripping his documents with a pale face. I apologize, but our technology will surely. No, that's enough. This discussion is over. Charlotte cut him off coldly and stood up from her chair. Excuse me, I said as I entered the room and approached her. Miss Charlotte, your father is asking for you. Ugh, fine. As soon as we stepped out into the hallway, she let out a deep sigh and muttered to herself. What a waste of time. That proposal was worthless. As we walked toward the executive office, I quietly spoke up. But it was an interesting technology, wasn't it? What? Charlotte stopped in her tracks. Sure, it may not be usable in its current form, but their unique circuit design. With some adjustments, it could open up new possibilities. Wait a second, do you actually understand technology? Ever since my days as a driver, I've been studying various aspects of the industry. The low-power control circuit they developed is unstable right now, but the concept itself is innovative. I continued, getting a little excited. Traditional circuits require a constant power supply, but their design only sends power exactly when needed. If we combine their control method with our existing technology, their company may be small, but their on-the-ground ingenuity and problem-solving skills are something that big corporations can't easily replicate. I spoke steadily. And, did you notice? That salesman's hands were shaking. Were they? He was probably desperate. It's tough for small businesses these days. Charlotte's expression darkened slightly. Our job isn't just about maximizing profit, I said, glancing out the hallway window at the city skyline. It's about nurturing technology, supporting people. That's what drives the industry forward as a whole. That sounds just like something my father would say. Her voice softened slightly. Yes, Mr. Adams often says, a great tree can only grow strong when the surrounding trees thrive as well. I always thought you were just a lucky driver who got promoted out of nowhere. But you actually see things clearly, don't you? A small smirk played on her lips, as if she had just discovered something unexpected. Lucky boy, huh? I chuckled at the nickname. From that day on, Charlotte's attitude toward me started to change little by little. During business meetings, she started listening to the other party more carefully. She still gave tough critiques when needed, but she always followed up with constructive suggestions. One evening. Hey, Ryan. Charlotte, who had been working late, approached my desk. Is something wrong? That small company from before. Do you think we could give them another chance to present their proposal? I looked up in surprise. I haven't been able to stop thinking about their technology, she admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. Sure, as it is now, it's not viable. but if we combine it with our own technology. If they ask why I'm changing my mind now, I'll go and apologize myself. Understood. I'll set up a meeting right away. Her smile at that moment was softer than I had ever seen before, carrying a warmth that was almost unfamiliar. The representative from the company looked shocked at first, as if he couldn't believe it, but he immediately and eagerly accepted our invitation. During the meeting, Charlotte sincerely apologized for her previous behavior, leaving the representative visibly humbled by her gesture. From that point on, we built a strong relationship with their company, refining and improving technology together. Since then, Charlotte started valuing direct conversations with engineers. She even made efforts to visit work sites, listening to feedback from those on the ground. Charlotte has changed a lot recently. One day, Mr. Adams spoke with a calm expression. "It's thanks to you, Ryan." "Oh no, not at all. There's no need to be modest." Mr. Adams gazed out the window as he continued. "She's always been smart, but that intelligence sometimes led to arrogance. I think she's learning how to be more empathetic from you." I couldn't find the words to respond. I had simply realized that watching her grow had become one of my greatest joys. As time passed, Charlotte and I naturally became aware of each other's feelings. It all started with one particular evening. "Hey, Ryan." Charlotte, working late again, approached my desk. "Is something wrong?" "Thanks for preparing the documents for tomorrow's board meeting. My father will love the way you structured them. Impressive as always." She hesitated for a moment before quietly continuing. "Ryan, you really are an unusual person. You once told me you grew up in a single-parent home, right? But you never see it as something to be ashamed of. Instead, you've turned it into a strength. The reason you understand people so well is because of the life you had with your mother." She looked straight into my eyes. "And I've realized I'm drawn to that kindness of yours." "Wait, what?" Her sudden confession left me speechless. "Sorry, that was probably weird to say all of a sudden." She quickly averted her gaze, flustered. That reaction was so unlike the usual composed and confident Charlotte, it was strangely endearing. "I know, I feel the same way." I slowly pieced together my words, trying to make sense of my emotions. "I've always thought about you, Charlotte." Just then, her phone rang. Charlotte hurriedly answered the phone. Her expression darkened with each passing second. "Ryan, it's my father. Something's wrong." Her voice shook with panic. We rushed to the hospital, but Mr. Adams never regained consciousness. It was a sudden stroke. The doctor's words echoed heavily through the white hallway. Charlotte clung to her father's hand, crying uncontrollably. All I could do was stay by her side. 3 days later, Mr. Adams passed away. At his funeral, many prominent figures from the industry gathered, a testament to the deep respect he commanded. But behind the scenes, the question of his successor had already become a major topic of discussion. "I can't believe Mr. Adams has gone so suddenly. Charlotte is the likely successor, but she's still too young. Maybe this is an opportunity for a change in leadership." Such whispers circulated both inside and outside the company. 1 week after the funeral, an emergency board meeting was called. Charlotte sat in the conference room, composed and dignified in a perfectly pressed suit. "I will take over as president," she declared. "My father left a will for such circumstances, entrusting the company to me." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Charlotte, we understand how you feel." An experienced board member spoke up with concern. "But aren't you still too young? Perhaps it would be best to gain more experience first." "I am fully prepared for this responsibility." Charlotte met each board member's gaze as she continued, her voice calm but resolute. "I know I still have much to learn, but my father taught me something important: to listen to people, to grow together with them." I nodded firmly at her words, offering my silent support. And I am not alone. Charlotte glanced briefly in my direction. Even if I can't do this alone, I know that with everyone's support, I can protect and further what my father built. The room fell into silence. Then, the most senior board member slowly stood up. I support Charlotte. With that, one by one, voices of agreement followed. Had this been the old Charlotte, she might have tried to assert authority through sheer willpower. But now she sought to understand others and move forward with them. That night, long after the meeting had ended, in the president's office, Charlotte sat gazing at a photo of her father. Do you think I can really do this? Her voice trembled slightly. You can, I said quietly. You become strong enough for this. But still. And you're not alone, I'm with you. Tears welled up in her eyes. If you weren't here, I gently pulled her into an embrace. Thank you for being my support. At that moment, I made a vow that I would always stand by her side, just as my mother had always been there for me with unwavering sincerity. 6 months later, Charlotte now led Adams Electronics as its young female president. There were difficult times, but she never shouldered the burden alone, choosing instead to overcome challenges with the help of those around her. And then, exactly 1 week after that fateful reunion, we have Brandon from Simmons Technology here to see you. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom. Charlotte's expression clouded for a brief moment. Please prepare the meeting room for us. Understood. Of course, in the office, we all addressed Charlotte with the proper respect due to her role as president. We kept our personal and professional lives strictly separate. A few minutes later, in the meeting room, it was just the three of us, Brandon, Charlotte, and me. Unlike at the reunion, Brandon now sat with slumped shoulders, his head hanging low. I sincerely apologize. He bowed deeply. My behavior the other day was completely unacceptable. I am truly sorry. Charlotte remained silent, studying him carefully. Her gaze was neither cold nor warm. It was simply an observant, quiet stare. Brandon. Her voice was clear and composed, yet it carried a surprising warmth. In fact, I had already received multiple complaints from our employees regarding our dealings with your company. Brandon's body tensed slightly. Sudden deadline changes, requests for overtime work on holidays, and even alterations to quality control standards. Indeed, complaints about Simmons Technology had been surfacing from every department. The design team had voiced frustrations about being forced into last-minute specification changes and unreasonable delivery schedules with no technical justification. The sales team had reported being pressured into unilateral price reductions and being threatened with orders being shifted to competitors. Even the finance department had raised concerns about frequent payment delays. Charlotte paused briefly, watching Brandon's reaction. To be frank, based on these issues alone, we had every reason to reconsider our partnership. Brandon's face grew pale. And yet, we didn't take immediate action. Do you know why? Brandon shook his head slightly, confused. It was because. Charlotte glanced at me for a moment before continuing. Because this man, Ryan, told me, let's wait. I turned to Brandon and spoke quietly but firmly. I thought, maybe you were just trying your best in your own way. What? You were arrogant, yes, but behind that, I saw someone struggling trying to prove yourself. Brandon's eyes grew misty. You took on the role of executive VP in your father's company. The pressure must have been immense. That's why. I wanted to give you time to grow. But in the end, you were the one who threw away the chance yourself. Charlotte's voice turned sharp. Your behavior at the reunion, it wasn't just arrogance. It was a complete lack of basic human decency. Brandon had no words left. He simply hung his head in shame. Just then, the conference room door swung open. I apologize for my lateness. The man who entered was none other than Brandon's father, the president of Simmons Technology, Richard Simmons. "My son has committed a terrible mistake." Richard bowed deeply. Brandon hurriedly followed suit, bowing beside his father. "We sincerely apologize. Please forgive us." Father and son both bowed so deeply it seemed their heads might touch the floor. Charlotte did not waver, keeping a firm expression. "I'm very sorry, but that will not be possible." Her voice was calm yet carried an undeniable strength. "I have employees to protect, workers who have suffered and been disheartened by our dealings with your company. As a business leader." Before she could finish, Brandon suddenly looked up and pushed back. "Then what about us? We have employees to support too. We have factories to keep running. And now you're just cutting us off without warning? This is too cruel." "Brandon, enough." His father, Richard Simmons, grabbed his arm firmly. "I apologize for my foolish son." His voice trembled. In his eyes, there was a deep weariness and resignation. "We're leaving. We won't cause any more trouble." "But, Dad." "Be quiet. Ryan, I'm disgusted with you. How could you do this to me? You people have no heart?" Richard pulled his son up by the arm. "My sincerest apologies, Ms. Adams." With one final bow, he dragged his son out of the room. On his back, I could see the deep regret of a father burdened by his child's mistakes. Just then, a calm voice called out from the hallway, "Ms. Adams." "Oh, Walter." Charlotte's expression softened slightly. An elderly man with white hair stood there. Walter, a veteran engineer at Adams Electronics who had long been in charge of dealings with Simmons Technology. "So, it's finally come to this," Walter said with a quiet sigh. Walter wore a slightly melancholic expression. He had likely anticipated this outcome, as a hint of resignation could be seen in his eyes. "Yes, it's unfortunate, but trust is everything in business." Charlotte nodded. "Things weren't always this beat lately. Their demands have been excessive. It was inevitable, I suppose. I only wish I could have done more to prevent this," Walter said, looking out the window with nostalgia in his eyes. His words carried the weight of experience and deep understanding. "Walter." Charlotte's voice softened in response. Her once stern expression melted into a gentle smile. "You've worked tirelessly on this account for many years. I'm sorry it had to end this way." "You don't need to apologize, Ms. Adams." Walter shook his head with a quiet chuckle. "I could only stand by and watch as things deteriorated. In the end, this was the right decision." His voice carried both professional pride and human kindness. "Everything is digitalized now," Walter mused with a faint smile. "Computers calculate everything, machines make automatic adjustments. Sure, efficiency has improved, but..." There was a deeper sentiment in his words. "True craftsmanship is something much more delicate. The feel of materials, temperature, humidity, things you can only sense with your fingertips." Walter's hands were rough, aged by years of expertise and precision. How many parts had he touched, refined, and adjusted over the decades? Back in the day, we would spend weeks, even months perfecting a single component. But I suppose today's younger generation can no longer afford that luxury of time, he chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, I'm rambling. Nostalgia makes an old man talk too much." There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet acceptance of time's passage. "But Walter, your skills are still invaluable," Charlotte said with conviction. "When it comes to custom parts requiring delicate adjustments, work that machines can't handle, we always turn to you." Walter lowered his eyes slightly, as if embarrassed by the praise. "Well, if my experience is still of some use." "You're not just a technical advisor." Charlotte smiled warmly. "You're also a mentor to our younger engineers. You help them not just with technical challenges, but also with their personal struggles. Around here, you're like the company's grandfather. Walter's eyes crinkled with amusement. It took me all these years to finally understand, he said slowly. Despite his vast experience, he never flaunted his knowledge. Instead, he quietly guided the younger generation, watching them grow. Looking at him, I felt a deep appreciation for the richness of a life dedicated to craftsmanship. Even after stepping back from the front line, he continued to shine in his own way. That was who Walter was. In the end, he was assigned to another client, and the transition process began. Then, a week later, on Monday morning, chaos erupted. Ms. Adams, we have a serious problem. A public relations executive, Adam, burst into the executive office, his face pale as a ghost. What happened? Charlotte remained composed as she asked. It's the business magazine, tomorrow's edition of Weekly Business. Adam handed over a copy of the draft article, and my eyes were immediately drawn to the headline. The tyrannical heiress, a president's ruthless takeover and corrupt rule with her husband. They didn't even bother to get an interview before publishing this trash. Adam gritted his teeth in frustration. The article completely twisted Charlotte's appointment as a president and our marriage into a scandal. She used her father's death as an opportunity to seize power. A former chauffeur turned lover granted a suspicious promotion. She cuts off business partners at will, eliminating anyone she dislikes. The stock price. It's been plummeting since this morning. A breathless Marcus, the finance director, ran in with the latest update. There was no doubt the company's credibility was under attack. At that moment, Charlotte's phone rang. As soon as she saw the caller ID, her expression stiffened. Brandon. She put the call on speaker. A crude laugh echoed through the room. Serves you right. The humble, apologetic Brandon from last week was gone, replaced by his usual arrogance. Your company's stock is going to keep tanking. You know why? Because I fed that magazine the story myself. Charlotte's expression darkened for a moment. This is what you get for daring to anger me, Ryan. So, do you regret it now? Charlotte let out a quiet breath. Brandon. Her voice was eerily composed. So you were the source of the article. Thank you for confirming that. What? Brandon's tone wavered, caught off guard. Thanks to you, I now have absolute certainty that cutting ties with you was the right decision. Charlotte's voice carried a dignified strength. We terminated our contract with you to protect our company's credibility, and that decision was the right one. Don't be ridiculous. Your company is finished. As soon as the call with Brandon ended, the office phone started ringing nonstop. Ms. Adams, is there any truth to the article in the business magazine? We are considering reviewing our ongoing projects with your company. Could you clarify your management structure for us? One inquiry after another flooded in from business partners, throwing the company into complete turmoil. This can't go on. Adam, the public relations director, murmured with a pale face. It'll be fine. Charlotte stood up calmly. We will hold a press conference. What? But Ms. Adams, we don't have any concrete evidence to refute the article yet, no preparation at all. Adam hurriedly tried to stop her. It was true, at this moment, they had no concrete material to counter the claims in the article. If we remain silent, it will only fuel further speculation. Charlotte's voice was steady, unwavering. But even the board members looked uneasy. A single misstep at the press conference could lead to an even bigger scandal. On the other hand, staying silent would only cause the company's credibility to erode further with each passing day. Then a quiet voice broke through the tension. Excuse me. A quiet voice echoed through the president's office. Turning around, I saw Walter standing there. Walter? Charlotte's expression showed a flicker of surprise. Could I have a moment of your time? Walter had a nostalgic look on his face. In his eyes, there was a sense of firm resolve. Before the press conference, there's something I need to tell you. Charlotte nodded silently. The next evening, the press conference was held at a hotel in the heart of the city, drawing a crowd of major media reporters. Flashes flickered from cameras as Charlotte sat gracefully before the assembled journalists. Thank you all for being here today. Her voice was calm and composed. I would like to clarify the facts regarding the recent magazine report. The room fell silent. First, regarding my relationship with my husband. It is true that he initially joined our company as a driver, however. Charlotte began to speak slowly and deliberately. She talked about her father, about my growth, about how we met, and how we eventually married. Her sincere words captivated the audience. Realizing there wasn't much of a scandal to exploit, the reporters began shifting their questions. Then why did you terminate your contract with Siemens Technology? This was a decision made based on sound management principles. Charlotte answered steadily. Our company values trust above all else. Our relationships with business partners are not just about profit, they are built on mutual trust. Can you be more specific? A reporter pressed further. We determined that there were serious issues with Brandon Simmons' conduct as an executive. The room stirred with murmurs. Do you have any proof? Wasn't this decision based on personal feelings? The tension in the room increased as reporters fired off their questions. Flashes from cameras illuminated the scene, but Charlotte remained poised. Ms. Adams, isn't it reckless for a president to unilaterally cut ties with such a major partner? Isn't this a blatant abuse of power? A case of a young female president making impulsive decisions? Charlotte quietly closed her eyes for a moment before reopening them. Her expression was resolute, without a trace of doubt. We have documented records of our interactions with Siemens Technology. A ripple of surprise spread through the audience. Charlotte took out a small recording device. This contains actual conversations from our business dealings with Siemens Technology. She pressed play. A harsh voice echoed through the speakers. You subcontractors should just do as you're told. Deadlines? Who cares? We're giving you the order, so work through the night and weekends if you have to. If you complain, we'll just take our business elsewhere. The room fell into stunned silence. Reporters, momentarily frozen, quickly began jotting down notes. This is. A reporter managed to squeeze out the words. This is the voice of Brandon Simmons, the executive vice president of Siemens Technology, isn't it? Charlotte nodded calmly. Yes, this is an example of his everyday conduct in business dealings with us. She pressed the button again. What quality control? Just do what we say. Defective products? If they show up, that's your problem, not ours. The press room erupted into murmurs. This is a serious issue. Did he just suggest deliberate manipulation of quality control records? This is a clear compliance violation. Reporters fired off overlapping questions. Our decision to terminate the contract was based on the serious corporate misconduct evident in their business practices. Charlotte's voice was unwavering. Our company has always prioritized trust since its founding. Quality, deadlines, and above all, the relationships we build with our partners. She took a deep breath before continuing. My father always said, technology is about people. Machines and facilities can be replaced, but trust cannot be bought. Without trust, true technological advancement is impossible. The press room fell silent. We will continue to uphold the principles that my father instilled in this company. Even if it means losing short-term profits, we will protect our credibility. That is the core value of Adams Electronics. The reporter's questions began to shift. Can you elaborate on Siemens Technology's corporate culture? What impact will this have on their other subcontractors? How do you see this affecting the industry as a whole? Charlotte answered each question calmly and thoroughly. By the time the conference ended, the focus of public scrutiny had completely shifted towards Simmons Technology's questionable business practices. After the conference, Charlotte returned to the waiting room and bowed deeply. She wasn't bowing to the press, she was bowing to Walter. Walter, thank you so much for everything. The recording of Brandon Simmons' abusive remarks, all of it, had been in Walter's possession. It turned out that Walter had always recorded his dealings with Simmons Technology. Really, we made it through the press conference thanks to you. You've saved the company's credibility. No, I'm just glad I could be of help. At that moment, the waiting room door burst open. You bastards, are you kidding me? Brandon stormed in, his face flushed with rage. How dare you hold a press conference like that? His fists trembled, his face twisted in anger. But in his eyes, there was more than just fury, there was something else, something deeper. Charlotte let out a sigh and faced him directly. We simply denied the false accusations against us, and revealed the truth we had been keeping quiet about. Shut up! You just wanted to ruin my company. How are you going to fix this? This is all your fault. Brandon lashed out, his temper flaring. I was about to call security to have him removed when an unexpected voice spoke up. That's enough, Brandon. A quiet yet firm voice echoed through the room. Walter slowly stood up. Who the hell are you? Don't talk to me like we're close. Brandon turned to glare at him. At that moment, Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. His hands trembled slightly as he held it up. This boy, he was such a sweet child. The picture showed a young boy grinning as he sat on a wooden horse. In the background was an old, traditional style house. What? This photo? Brandon's voice shook. Walter, what is this? Charlotte looked at Walter in confusion. This was taken in my backyard, a long time ago. His voice was filled with nostalgia. The room fell completely silent. Everyone's eyes darted between Walter and Brandon. The boy in the photo bore a striking resemblance to Brandon. Wait, does this mean? No way, are you saying, Grandpa? Brandon whispered, his face draining of color. The man he had worked with for years had been hiding such a crucial truth. I'm sorry for keeping this from all of you. Walter bowed deeply. There were complicated circumstances. Charlotte slumped into a chair, struggling to process the revelation. I can't believe it. Walter, you're Brandon's grandfather. What the hell? My dad told me my grandfather died right after I was born. Brandon's voice cracked. His face was a mixture of anger, confusion, and something indescribable. My father never mentioned you, not even once. Yes, I figured as much. Walter smiled sadly, and then he slowly began to tell his story. I was a terrible father, and an even worse grandfather. His voice carried decades of regret. Brandon had heard this voice many times before, but somehow it sounded completely different now. Back then, all I cared about was my craft. From morning to night, my mind was filled only with work. Walter gazed out the window as if looking into the past. I was obsessed with perfecting my skills. I spent my nights drinking with colleagues, discussing techniques, while my wife cried alone at home. My son, your father, ate dinner by himself every night. His voice faltered for a moment. And I barely even gave them money. I kept buying machines for my research, claiming it was for my work. Brandon stayed silent, listening. The anger in his expression had faded, replaced by something more complex. My son resented me, of course. I was never there. Even when his mother fell ill, I refused to go to the hospital for work. Walter's voice trembled. I will never forget it. When my son turned 18, he left for college and said, I never want to see you again. As far as I'm concerned, you're already dead. Charlotte gasped. Brandon's face tightened. He worked his way up from nothing, building Simmons Technology with his own hands. He provided for his family, something I never did. He stayed in touch with my wife, but nor to me, I was already gone. But time passed. The industry changed. Machines replaced the work I had dedicated my life to. My so-called craftsmanship was no longer needed. Walter let out a small sigh. His eyes were distant, as if watching his younger self fade into history. Before I knew it, I was alone. My wife had left. I finally learned the emptiness of returning to a house where no one was waiting. Walter turned his gaze toward Brandon. Then, I was assigned to Simmons Technology. At first, I didn't realize. But the moment I heard your name in a meeting, I couldn't help myself. I started recording, even if you didn't know who I was. Just hearing my grandson's voice made me happy. I couldn't believe how lucky I was. He smiled as if lost in the memory. At first, you were an incredible businessman, honest, hardworking. I was relieved, thinking that at least you had grown up straight, unlike me. Walter let out a deep sigh. But then, things changed. Maybe it was the pressure, or maybe the stress. But your words became harsher. You started treating people differently. Brandon lowered his head. He knew it was true. And yet, I kept recording. I just wanted to hear your voice. But as time went on, the recordings became harder to listen to. They were filled with cruelty. Still, I couldn't stop. Because after everything I had done, I had no right to interfere. Suddenly, Brandon stood up. Then why? Why the hell didn't you say anything? His voice rang through the room. Why didn't you stop me? Why did you just sit back and let it happen? You caused trouble for my father, for me. And now you're just showing up? Expecting what? Forgiveness? Brandon's voice shook with rage. Tears welled in his eyes as he glared at Walter. His voice was a mix of anger and sorrow. Hey, Brandon, that's enough. I stepped forward instinctively. Walter didn't deserve this, not now. It's okay, Ryan. Walter shook his head. He's right. This is all my doing. His voice was calm, steady. But that doesn't mean you can take it out on others. You. His whole body tensed. You were a terrible father. You abandoned your family. And now you're telling me not to cause trouble for others? You're ridiculous. His voice cracked as he spat the words. But Walter's expression didn't change. You're right, but can you listen to one more story? Walter slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out another old photo. It was of a young man holding a newborn baby in his arms. This is my father? Brandon's voice trembled. Yes, that's your father, and this baby is you. I was the one who gave you your name. What? Brandon's eyes widened in shock. Brandon, I chose that name for you. Walter smiled wistfully. I failed to devote myself as a father to my own son. So just once, when you were born, your father allowed me to see you, and he let me name you. Tears shimmered in Walter's eyes. It was just one moment, but it was the most precious moment of my life. His hands trembled as he handed over the photograph. As I held your tiny body, I prayed, may this child never become like me. May he grow to understand the world and walk a righteous path. Brandon took the photo, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. And yet, it seems you inherited my flaws. You made the same mistakes as I did. Walter's voice trailed off. No. Brandon suddenly shouted. No, I. His voice trembled like that of a lost child. I just wanted to be acknowledged. I wanted to be strong like my father. But the pressure, the fear of failure, before I knew it, I was hurting the people around me. Brandon collapsed to the floor, his hands clutching his head. My father, He never hurt anyone. He worked so hard and built everything honestly. But at that moment, Walter slowly knelt in front of him. Brandon. His voice was filled with deep love. It's not too late. Walter gently placed his hand on Brandon's head. You can still start over, unlike me, who realized my mistakes far too late. Brandon looked up. His tear-streaked eyes locked onto his grandfather's. Really? I can still fix this? His voice was fragile, yet full of hope. Yes. Walter smiled warmly. Because you are my grandson. At that moment, Brandon broke down in tears like a child, as if the heavy burden he had carried for so long had finally lifted. Walter silently stroked his grandson's back. For the first time in over 30 years, he was able to touch his grandson, not as a business associate, but as family. 1 month later, in the Adams Electronics conference room, a management meeting was underway. Ever since the weekly business article, our company's reputation has skyrocketed, Adams said, pointing at the data projected on the screen. Especially on social media, we're being recognized as a truly ethical company. We're also seeing an increase in new business inquiries from potential partners. We've also seen a surge in job applications for technical positions. Mark, the head of HR, added. Many applicants, especially younger engineers, mention wanting to work at a company that values both technology and humanity. Charlotte nodded quietly and glanced at a framed photograph of her late father. His beliefs had been right all along. Technology is about people. Those words had never felt more profound. After the meeting, as Charlotte and I reviewed documents, Walter knocked softly on the door. Excuse me. There was an urgency in his voice. Walter, is something wrong? Charlotte looked up, concerned. Walter bowed deeply. I realize this is a selfish request, but his voice trembled slightly. Simmons Technology is on the brink of collapse. Charlotte's expression grew serious. Yes, I've heard. Their major clients are withdrawing one after another, and their stock price has plummeted. At this rate, Ms. Adams. Walter met her gaze directly. Please, would you consider helping them? Charlotte let out a slow breath. Walter, restarting business with them is. Your concerns are completely justified, Walter said gently. But that boy, Brandon, is trying to change. If we act now, there's still time. Before he makes mistakes he can never take back. Before he becomes like me. His voice carried the earnest plea of a grandfather. I want to teach him the true meaning of craftsmanship. That craftsmanship is not about wielding power over others. It's about connection, growth, and passing on knowledge. Charlotte slowly stood up. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city. Walter. Her voice was soft yet firm. You are a vital part of this company. Your skills have brought us to where we are today. But more importantly, you've taught us the essence of craftsmanship, the importance of people. Our company wouldn't be what it is without you. Charlotte stepped forward and bowed deeply. Understood. If it's your request, I will do whatever I can. Ms. Adams, thank you. Tears welled up in Walter's eyes. The following week. In the Simmons Technology conference room, Charlotte sat across from Richard and Brandon Simmons, presenting a new proposal. A new joint project that utilizes the strengths of both companies, and Charlotte turned to Brandon. A mentorship program for young engineers personally led by Walter. Brandon's eyes widened as he glanced between Charlotte and his grandfather. You're serious? Yes. Charlotte nodded. But on one condition. Her voice was kind but resolute. Brandon straightened his posture. From now on, you must prioritize people. Technology is not meant to control others, it's meant to connect people and foster growth. You must never forget that." Brandon remained silent for a moment, then slowly he bowed deeply. For the first time, sincerity and determination were visible in his expression. 6 months later, in the Adams Electronics workshop, Walter stood surrounded by young engineers. At the center of the group was Brandon. "Can you feel the subtle texture?" Walter's voice was calm and steady. Brandon, who had once spoken only in commands and demands, now listened attentively, his eyes fixed on his grandfather's hands. "The material is breathing," recognizing that is the first step to true craftsmanship. The young engineers nodded quietly, taking notes. I silently stepped away from the scene. Walter looked more alive than ever. He must have truly enjoyed teaching his craft. That evening, I stood alone on the company rooftop watching the sunset. Down below, I could see the young employees leaving after their training session. "Ryan," a quiet voice called from behind me. Turning around, I saw Brandon standing there. He was different from 6 months ago. His presence was softer, calmer. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" There was no trace of arrogance in his voice. "Yeah, and you don't have to be so formal." Brandon gave a small nod and stepped up beside me. For a while, he just stared at the sky as if searching for the right words. I really am sorry." His voice was filled with genuine remorse. "Since middle school, for everything, I truly regret it." Tears glistened in his eyes. "Actually," Brandon took a deep breath before continuing, "I was jealous of you, Ryan." "What?" I turned to him in surprise and he let out a small, bitter laugh. "It sounds ridiculous, right? Me, the son of a president, being jealous of you. But I really was. You were always smiling. You and your mother, even though you weren't wealthy, you looked genuinely happy." Memories of my mother flashed through my mind. The small kitchen where we made curry together. Her homemade meals made from discounted ingredients crafted with care. And the way she beamed with joy whenever I told her, "This is delicious." I barely saw my father. We never ate together. There was always money. But the house felt empty. Brandon lowered his head. "So I lashed out. I taunted you. I bullied you. Because seeing your happiness only made me feel the void inside me even more. But that's just an excuse." His fists clenched. "There's no excuse for hurting others. I finally understand that now." Brandon turned to face me, his eyes filled with regret. "Grandpa, no, Walter taught me something. True strength isn't about controlling others. It's about standing beside them, growing together. I still have a long way to go, but I want to move forward one step at a time." Brandon bowed deeply. "I truly am sorry for everything, and thank you for giving me and my company another chance." I slowly extended my hand. "Brandon." He looked up. I smiled gently. My mother used to say, "Everyone makes mistakes. But the moment you realize them, you can start changing. You've already started." Tears spilled from Brandon's eyes. I patted his shoulder lightly. "This is just the beginning. Let's keep moving forward together." On the rooftop, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, the former bully and the bullied shook hands firmly. Our shadows stretched long and merged as one. From a short distance away, Walter watched silently. His face held deep relief and joy. 1 year later, Simmons Technology had begun regaining trust. Brandon's dedication and sincerity were gradually being recognized in the industry. "It's a long road ahead." One day, Charlotte murmured those words. "But change is happening little by little." I nodded quietly. At a recent business meeting, Brandon had listened attentively to his clients and offered constructive proposals. He was nothing like the arrogant man he had once been. "Walter's craftsmanship is truly remarkable." Charlotte smiled warmly. But it's more than just skill. He's also passing down the craft of nurturing people. Looking out the window, I reflected on it all. Everyone has something inside them that shines. Sometimes it's buried under pain or confusion. But with the right guidance, it can always come to light. Memories of my mother. Meeting with Ms. Adams. Walter's kindness. Charlotte's strength. Brandon's change. Everything was connected. People, technology, the future. True craftsmanship isn't something machines can replace. It thrives when it is shared, when it fosters connection. It's not just about passing down skills. It's about guiding hearts, forging bonds, and weaving hope for tomorrow. Walter's true craftsmanship. Now at last, it was being carried forward to the next generation.